Before the One Ring was created, Sauron, the Lord of the Rings himself, was known under many different names and had many different appearances throughout the history of Ea, the universe. So let's take a look at the many forms of Sauron. In order to deceive the elves, Sauron, meaning the abhorred as mentioned in the Index of Names in the Silmarillion, came to them as the Lord of Gifts Annatar. He had the elves of Eregion forge the Rings of Power, some of which he helped with, and 19 of those are known as the Great Rings. The ones that were given to the elves were made by Celebrimbor. There was Narya, the Ring of Fire, given to Círdan, and ends up with Gandalf at some point, Denya, Ring of Fire, given to Galadriel, and Vilya, the Ring of Air, given to Gil-galad. Then, as you know, he gave 7 to the dwarves, who used it to gain all their treasure, and 9 to the men. And after they had created that, of course, he created another one for himself, one that could control all of them. But the elves knew, and they took their rings off before he could use them to control them, and the dwarves just weren't affected and controlled because of their stronger willpower. But the men, on the other hand, they became corrupt and turned into Nazgul. This was during the Second Age. But long before that, even before the first, he was known as Mehron, which I've only seen mentioned in words, phrases, and passages in various tongues in The Lord of the Rings. And he was a Maya under the Vala, Aule, the Great Smith, and he was mighty in the lore of Aule's people. After some time, out of jealousy of the Valar, his overpowering admiration for order and Melkor's power, that he believed would help further his goal, for order, he turned to Melkor's side, and that's when he became Sauron, or Gorthar the Cruel, by different groups. In the First Age, again still before the forging of the rings, Sauron had tried to capture Luthien, the daughter of Thingol and Melian, to take her to Melkor, now known as Morgoth. In order to do so, he sent many werewolves to capture her, but each one was slain by Huan, including Draglun, the chief of those werewolves. Before Draglun died, however, he was able to return to Sauron and tell him about Huan, the great wolfhound and friend to Luthien. This is when Sauron took the form of the greatest werewolf who had ever lived. He headed towards the bridge and went to attack Luthien, but Huan intervened after she used a spell to tire him for a moment. The fight ended when Sauron finally surrendered and agreed to let Luthien go if he was set free from Huan's mouth, which he could not leave even in the form of a serpent. He then fled in the form of a vampire or bat-like creature. Side note, some of the things that you may find interesting about the writing of this tale was that Sauron's wolf form seems to have been inspired by Fenrir from Norse mythology, as a lot of things are, and Sauron had essentially replaced another character called Tevildu, the Prince of Cats, from the tale of Tinuvil. Now, contrary to what the movies show, Sauron did have a physical form, and did not become a giant fiery eye sitting on the top of Barad-dûr. So where was he? Why didn't we get to see him in that form? Well, because it seems to me, at least, don't quote me on this because I don't know Jackson's true intent, but it is easier to use as a literal literary device rather than a metaphorical one in a single trilogy, as it doesn't require more context. So that's probably the reason why they took out the battle between Aragorn and Annatar and replaced it with a troll, which by the way does not happen in the books, to not confuse the general audience. Yeah, let's just not talk about that. Where he may have gotten this idea of having a physical eye seems to be in the Mirror of Galadriel and several other places in the books. And in the books, Tolkien is pretty vague of what his physical form looks like at this point, but we have a few passages that sort of tell us. In Two Towers, Chapter 3, The Black Gate is Closed, when Gollum is speaking to Frodo, he says, yes, he only has 4 on the Black Hand, but they are enough. And in Letter 245, Tolkien describes him as very terrible. The form that he took was that of a man of more than human stature, but not gigantic. In his early incarnation, he was able to veil his power as Gandalf did, and could not appear as a commanding figure of great strength of body and supremely royal demeanor and countenance. So there we have it. All of Sauron's forms, at least I think, covered in one video. If you enjoyed it, please drop a like. Remember to hit subscribe and light the beacons to be alerted when a new video drops, and until our next meeting, I bid you farewell.